There may not be a playoff berth at the end of the tunnel, but the Seahawks have 10 wins for the first time since 2020 with a win on the road over the Rams. How do they get it done? We're breaking it all down here on our final post-game show here for the 2024 season on Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined here for our final post-game show of the 2024 season by my co-host, Connor Benintendi. And a special thanks to all the 12s out there, whether you're listening in from Everett, Washington, or Salt Lake City, Utah. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for tuning in and making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. The Seahawks may not be playing for a wild card game next week, but they did get to double-digit victories for the first time since 2020 with a 30-25 victory over the Los Angeles Rams at SoFi Stadium on Sunday. Obviously, Connor, the discussion's going to be, well, this was a meaningless game. The Seahawks couldn't play for a playoff spot anyway. The Rams played mostly reserves on offense. Defense, they played more starters, but sprinkled in some guys as the game unfolded. It's hard to look at this game from a face value perspective for that reason. And yet at the same time, again, this team has not won 10 games since 2020. And for Mike Macdonald to be the first head coach in franchise history to do that in his first season at the helm as a first-time head coach, it still feels like a pretty good accomplishment, especially when it hasn't mattered who the Rams have played against him over the years. It's always been a close game with Sean McVay on the other sidelines. Anytime you can beat him, that is a win-win situation for Mike Macdonald and company.
Yeah, Sean McVay has essentially owned the Seahawks since he took over as the head coach of the Rams. So it is always a big win anytime Seattle can beat the Rams. Like you talked about, Corbin, obviously the offense for Los Angeles was not at full strength. So I get, potentially trying to write off the fact, they got to 10 wins, big deal. The last one came against a team that wasn't really even trying. If you want to think that way, go ahead. I think you can also make the argument that there was a lot of close wins during the season that Seattle could have had to get to 10 wins in the first place, and we're having a whole different discussion here. So it's all just nitpicky, whatever you want to do. At the end of the day, Seattle got 10 wins, first time since 2020, and Mike Macdonald's the first head coach to do that in his first season. I think there's two schools of thought here, Corbin, if you want to look at the big picture of things. You have the one side of the fandom that is disappointed that obviously they didn't make the playoffs and that they didn't win more than 10 games whenever Pete Carroll did that. Pete Carroll had 9 wins in the last 2 seasons. So the argument there is there's only incremental progress and no playoff berth. But I think you look at the other side and you see a team that a lot of people predicted this Seahawks team to win, 5, maybe 6 games heading into the season. When you have a new head coach, you have to establish culture. You have all new coordinators coming in to establish new schemes. There's so much change that in some ways, Seattle's lucky that they even passed 7 wins and to even be where that they were at the end of the season. I think you've got to look at the positives for this team, especially with all the young players that are still on this roster that they're not going to have to think about contracts for quite yet. You can keep building them. You've got Ernest Jones coming out after the game, Corbin, which has been a hot topic this week whenever the Ian Rappaport reported that contract talks had stalled with Ernest Jones and the Seahawks. You've got him coming out after the game saying he wants to be a Seahawk, that he's confident a deal is going to get done. There's a lot of things that are going upward for Seattle as the season comes to an end, regardless of whether they're in the playoffs or not.
It's so easy to look back at games like the Giants game that you shouldn't have lost and feel like that's why you're not playing in the postseason. The first matchup with the Rams, there's a number of games we can point to. It was far from a perfect season, and there's obviously a lot of areas for improvement. This was also a very loaded, top-heavy conference. Just think about what's going on right now. The Minnesota Vikings and Detroit Lions are playing for the number 1 seed, and both teams have 13 wins going into this game, and one of those teams is going to be a wild card team. That's the kind of conference that you are looking at here this year in the NFC, and so it made it difficult. A lot of years, 10 wins would have been more than enough to get a wild card at minimum, if not win the division. This year, it didn't end up being the case. As far as this game goes, Seattle's defense, that was disappointing to me for most of this game, that the Rams were able to move up and down the field really with ease. And I understand they had some injuries during the game that cropped up. Reek Woolen and Trey Brown both exiting before halftime. You were playing Nehemiah Pritchett and Artie Burns at the outside cornerback spots. And so the Rams were able to throw the ball. They had over 300 passing yards in this game from Jimmy Garoppolo. They were able to move the ball consistently through the air. They got 7 chunk plays this game of 17 or more yards. And so you can look at that and say, you did that against backups. That's not a great ending for Mike McDonald's defense. But on the other side of the coin, I had to go back and watch the film again, but I counted to start the game. The Rams had 10 of their 11 normal starters playing on defense. And a lot of those guys played deep into the first half minimum. And Geno Smith had 4 touchdown passes today, the most he's ever had in a game in his career. They were playing against starters for a big chunk of this game. The Rams mostly were resting their offensive players, and most of their defensive guys were out there on the field, were playing in this game. And so I'm not looking at that one from the same lens. Seattle was going against starters. You got to see Braden Fisk and Jared Verse coming after Smith the first couple of drives of the game. I mean, they were playing their horses on defense. And for them to go out and put up 30 points in this last game, in a game that clearly the Rams were still playing hard in, and they always give the Seahawks fits. But I think that was the big positive for me today, is that you saw Ryan Grubb running some strong side play action, which we didn't see all year long. We got to see a lateral play, all kinds of stuff. It felt like it was a more well-rounded game plan. They ran the football well. And again, a lot of the Rams starters were playing on defense, so you can't use the asterisks there. Offensively, for the Rams going against Seahawks defense, you can. You shouldn't be giving up 4 consecutive scoring drives they did in the late second quarter into the middle of the fourth quarter in this game.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things too, Corbin, and this is something I was thinking about during the week, is actually whether the defense would struggle a little bit against a funky Rams offense, just because you don't have as much film on these players that they're going to be facing. I mean, who knows what Sean McVay had up his sleeve for some of these, second and third team guys that just he hadn't really ran all season because they're not on the field all the time, and he's going to have whatever he's using for his starters. And so I'm not worried about Mike McDonald's defense. We've seen what Mike McDonald can do on the defensive side of the football all season long, making adjustments at halftime, whatever it is throughout the game. We've seen how well his scheme has adapted to these players and how well the players have adapted to the scheme. But on the offensive side of the ball, we've maligned Ryan Grubb. A lot of people have maligned Ryan Grubb just throughout the season, and the lack of commitment to running the football and things, questionable decisions in certain situations, especially short yardage situations, whether you run the ball, pass the ball. There were still some issues with that today, Corbin, but you're right. The offense was firing on all cylinders. Geno Smith looked as good as he has all season, which I think there's an argument there to say, well, it's kind of disappointing to have Geno Smith look as good as he did today in the final game of the season when there's nothing left to really play for playoff-wise. But still, I think you saw Grubb kind of take a little bit of pressure off of himself, maybe try a couple new things, obviously, with the lateral from Jackson Smith and Jigba to Zach Charbonnet, which was just a fun play to call in a game that is about to be going into the offseason. I'm curious to see what happens with Ryan Grubb after a game like this, Corbin, because maybe they can work on some things with his scheme in the offseason. And you're at this point now, you have a whole season to look at. You have 17 games to go back and review during the offseason. Seattle's going to finish this season with they went 8-1 when they ran the ball 20 or more times, and they went 2-6 when they ran the ball less. I think you can go back and you can take some of the formulaic things that this team has established and say, we need to do this, we need to do that, and we can actually start to achieve the things we were trying to do. And maybe they avoid some of the rough outcomes that they had this season. I'm not saying just keep Ryan Grubb or fire Ryan Grubb. I just think they're going to have some tough decisions on what to do with Ryan Grubb in the offense.
That is going to be one of the biggest question marks going into this first week of the offseason, and we'll have a chance tomorrow to hear from Mike McDonald on that front. But this certainly, if Ryan Grubb was on the hot seat, I don't know how much this carries weight-wise for him. Again, I know that the Rams were just waiting for that wild card game next week, and they didn't have their starters playing on offense. They started to wean some of those starters out of the lineup on defense as this game unfolded, but still, it can be a building block. And if you can prove, look, I was able to add in some of these wrinkles and some of the things you have to do playing against NFL defenses, maybe that's enough for Mike McDonald to say, I still have faith with a full offseason, we can get this where we need to go. When we come back, we are going to have our final game balls of the 2024 season, offense, defense, and special teams. That's coming up next year on our post-game edition of Locked On Seahawks. Today's episode is sponsored by Prize Picks. If you love watching the game, you're going to love Prize Picks, the easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy. Whether it's football, basketball, or any of your favorite sports, Prize Picks makes your holidays bigger and brighter. You can now win up to 1,000 times your money on Prize Picks. Plus, they're giving away $30+ million in rewards during Picksmas. And when your picks hit, Prize Picks makes it easy to cash out. You can get your money in as fast as 15 minutes. This week, I had Jared Goff for more than 250 passing yards, hoping that that's going to happen against the Minnesota Vikings defense. It's quick to put that pick in. It's simple. So much fun to challenge myself and my friends. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code LOCKEDINNFL to get $50 instantly after your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 instantly when you play just $5. Prize Picks, run your game. Welcome back to our final post-game edition of Locked On Seahawks for the 2024 season. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be teaming up with my co-host, Connor Benintendi. And a special thanks to all the 12s who are listening in. And thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. The Seahawks picking up their 10th win of the season. Unfortunately, they won't get to go for an 11th in the playoffs, but still a 10-7 season. It can be a positive building block for a first-year coach and Mike McDonald going into 2025. Looking back at the game, it's time to hand out our final game balls of the 2025 season. And I don't know about you, Connor, but there was a player that had a huge game today who may or may not be on this roster next year. We don't know what's going to happen with Noah Fant, but it had been multiple seasons since he found the end zone. That drought finally over, and I know how excited you were to talk about that as your offensive game ball recipient.
Yeah, we talked all offseason and multiple times coming into this season and during this season just about what Ryan Grubb was going to be able to do for Noah Fant, and he still did not have a single receiving touchdown all season long until the final game of the season. He did not have a receiving touchdown last season. He had not had one since 2022. And let me say this, Corbin, his first one in 2 years looked real painful when he gets his legs taken out from under him, ends up basically folding up on top of himself just beyond the goal line. But it was just, nonetheless, it was a 16-yard would-be game-winning touchdown catch. And it was just nice to see Noah Fant start to get targeted, really on the opposite end of the 50-yard line for once. I mean, it just hasn't happened very often this season. So 5 catches for 63 yards. He leads the team in both receptions, receiving yards. And you're right. I don't know if he's on this team next year, Corbin. I think he will be, especially because you just need more tight ends than ever in today's NFL. And you've got Barner, who's really rising. We're going to get to him. Unfortunately, it's just going to be for a slightly bigger cap hit, but it's nice to see him get involved again.
Yeah, I thought that this was one of his better games. He's had a few other games this year where he's been over 50 receiving yards and done some nice things, but he just has not been able to get in the end zone. And this is a guy, when he played in Denver, he scored a fair amount of touchdowns. He wasn't a big fantasy player by any means, but he scored some touchdowns. And it's been an absolute struggle for him to be involved in the red zone. And it was really nice seeing Geno Smith get the ball to him down the seam. And I know that's one that when you go back and look at it, no offense, like, man, that's one of the tough jobs of a tight end when you got it down the seam there, getting your legs taken out from under you. But really good job of holding on to it. Hopefully he is okay. He had to go to the locker room after that play, but he didn't hold on to it and finishes with 5 catches, 63 yards. We've got to talk about the guy that made the throw, though. And look, I know that there are going to be a lot of discussions over the next few weeks, and you know it's going to be happening internally. We don't know what Geno Smith's future holds. Is he going to be playing out 2025 on the final year of his current contract? Is he going to get extended? Do the Seahawks move on from him? Regardless of what they do, though, this was a masterful performance by him. And again, I'm going to reiterate, the Rams played 10 of their 11 starters on defense to open this game. And a good chunk of the first half, most of those guys played into the second half for many of them as well. So you can't just say it was against all backups. I felt like this passing game was humming from the start. Smith completed 11 of his first 13 throws, and he finished the game with 4 touchdowns, which he had never done before. I actually thought he had done that at one point for the Seahawks, but he had never thrown 4 touchdowns in a game. No interceptions, no turnovers, took a few sacks, but there was one play in particular. And look, this is the play, and I posted this on social media. I know that it drew an uproar for some people. Look, this is the reason why I'm skeptical about Geno Smith not being the guy next year, and that you're going to find somebody that is going to be as good or better for 2025. The second touchdown throw that he had that went to DK Metcalf, he spun out of 3 different defenders trying to bring him down in the backfield. I mean, it was a spectacular highlight reel play, and then lofts the ball 20 yards downfield to DK Metcalf in the back of the end zone, and Seattle goes up 14-3. You just see so many plays like that where there's pressure and the offensive line breaks down, the pass protection's breaking down, and he finds a way to get out of the pocket and then make the other team pay. We didn't see enough of that in the red zone this year, but you did in that instance. And I just thought it was his most complete game of the season. Again, it's disappointing when you consider the circumstances, but at the same time, look, this is another example of be careful what you wish for if you're hoping to get another quarterback in next year when you're considering what's available in free agency and the draft. Geno Smith has shown time and time again that he can get the job done. The question's going to be, can you improve the roster around him enough that you really can maximize whatever window he's got as a starter?
Yeah, honestly, we've talked about Geno so much in these post-game pods this year, Corbin, and you pretty much just said it perfectly. So all I'm going to say is give the man an offensive line, run it back. I don't think you have a better option if you're Seattle at this point. I mean, you see what he can do whenever – and actually, mind you, we also don't know what his actual health status is at this point, Corbin, because you see him – I think it was the same knee that he was being bothered by just a couple weeks ago. He's also gimping around, and he's barely able to hand the ball off late in that game. I think he's had a pretty significant knee issue that he's been playing through as well, and he's still able to have that mobility to be able to avoid pressure and then make the throws, and then also use his legs whenever he has to. So before I go off on a whole nother tangent and make this part go insanely long, give the man an offensive line and see what he can do.
That's where it's got to be. And I think you got to do what the Kansas City Chiefs did a few years back. And look, we have a long off season to really dive in detail what's going to happen there, but this is a really good game for Geno Smith to have on film here and just show with all the other good plays he made this year. Look, hey, pass protection held up a little better in this game. Look what I was able to do. So that is something you can carry in if there's any negotiating that's going on. We don't know. There's a lot of different directions this could go. Let's talk defensive game balls now. There were 2 snubs from the Pro Bowl that you and I hate the word snub when it comes to Pro Bowl because it's an imperfect process. Fans are voting for players and coaches that are voting. It's a popularity contest in a lot of regards. So I don't like the word snub a lot of the time, but there were 2 players that absolutely fit that bill. And I thought both of them went out with a chip on their shoulders today, and they were a big reason the Seahawks got this win. And maybe that's enough to get in the mind of all pro voters, and they can actually get the recognition they deserve.
I really hope they do, Corbin, because Julian Love just continues to play outstanding football. And it's so funny because you go back and you look at last season, you look at the numbers that Julian Love had last season. He had more interceptions. He had more tackles. He had more he passed his pass breakup stats from this game, or with this game, he passed the pass breakup stats that he had last season. But anyways, the numbers look better last season, and Jordan Love gets the Pro Bowl nod this season. If you really just watch Jordan Love play football, he's been a significantly better football player. He's been a significantly better leader for this team, constantly coming up, and he's really just absorbed this role and been both an enforcer and then also a midfielder that has played both roles exceptionally well. Obviously today he has 6 tackles, the pass deflections, he has an interception. I just don't think you could have anybody in Mike McDonald's defense do Julian Love's role better than what he's doing right now. And I hope he gets in the All-Pro conversation, because the people who are really, really watching these games and are watching the Seahawks week in and week out, they're going to see what he's adding to this defense, coming up, making hits. He had multiple hits today, Corbin, a couple of those on the pass breakups where it was just a boom, and that's what he's been doing all season. And also, let's talk about his calves for a second, because that's something that I just have not seen in a long time, where a player comes out with no long socks on. I just couldn't get over the fact that his calves were just shining in the first half. And then he comes back out in the second half and he's got the socks back on, which is just like, I don't know. It was just so strange. I think he might get a fine for that, but good for him for at least trying it. It looked funky, but whatever.
The things that we notice on these telecasts. I got to go with the other player that had a major gripe. And look, Julian Love in his case, you look at the safeties that have played well in the NFC. I mean, Xavier Kinney's had a phenomenal year in Green Bay, 7 interceptions. I mean, the safeties that are getting all those picks are the ones that typically are going to get the recognition, and that's what happened with the Pro Bowl. Julian Love's got 3 interceptions. He's a really good season, but doesn't maybe have the stats to compare. You cannot say that, though, about the big cat, Leonard Williams. What a way to end the season. I mean, he came out angry today. You could tell, and he already has comments that have gone public about how frustrated he was about not making the Pro Bowl. Look, I'm trying not to make this something that I worry about, but why wouldn't you? When you're a player of that caliber, he had 1 Pro Bowl in his first 9 seasons, and he doesn't get picked for this one. He's been a great player for a long time, but 2 sacks for the big cat today on Jimmy Garoppolo. That puts him at 11 for the season. He's the first Seahawks since Frank Clark and Jaron Reed way back in 2018 to get to double-digit sacks. He was just a half sack away from tying his career high. He also had a tackle for a loss away from those sacks in this game. He was all over Jimmy Garoppolo. He was the one guy that was consistently getting pressure on Jimmy Garoppolo in this game. And I'm sorry, you look at the numbers, he's got more sacks than any defensive tackle in the NFL this year. He's got more quarterback hits than any defensive tackle. He's been excellent against the run. He's got a 92-yard pick six. This man should not only be an all-pro, he should be the first guy on the line on the first team all-pro. There's been some really good defensive tackle play this year, but to me, Leonard Williams has been one of one this season in the first year post Aaron Donald.
I agree, Corbin. And the even better part about it is none of these numbers encapsulate the versatility that he's had in Mike McDonald's defense this season.
Yep.
Just being moved all over the line. You see him stand up. You see him rush off the edge. You see him in a 3-point stance, 4-point stance down on the line of scrimmage. I mean, it's just everything that he's been doing this year. You're not seeing any other defensive lineman do it in the NFL right now. And I think when you incorporate the numbers plus the versatility, if this guy does not come out of this season with some accolades, I mean, it's just East Coast bias at its finest. I know that people get annoyed hearing about East Coast bias and all that, but it exists. And Leonard Williams not getting the recognition he deserves, I think, is the perfect example of it. And it's really unfortunate.
Real quick, let's get our special teams game ball. And I felt like today was a microcosm of what special teams has been for the Seahawks all year. There was some really good plays on special teams. There was also some really bad ones. I thought Tyrese Knight played fine on defense, but the fact he could not down the ball at the 1-yard line and ended up kicking it into the end zone, that was an ugly play on a perfect punt by Michael Dixon. We saw a really long kick return, a couple long punt returns. So there have been issues on special teams all year. It continued into this game. But the one man that has been a constant on this football team, Jason Myers, extending his record, Connor, his 9th 50-plus yard field goal, a 56-yard kick in this game that ended up being big in a tight game. Finished the year 25 for 29 for field goals. And when you consider how many of them were of the long-range variety, that percentage is pretty darn good. A really strong finish for him. And look, it was an even year. We expected it, I guess.
You took the words right out of my mouth. That's really all I was going to say is it was an even year. This is what we said was going to happen. I mean, we didn't know it for sure, but we had some pretty strong evidence leading into this season that Jason Myers was going to be good. But no, I think what's really interesting about Jason Myers this season, since now we can talk about it like it's in the rearview mirror, is really he is up there now with Stephen Hauschka as possibly, I think actually definitively almost the 2 best kickers in Seahawks history at this point. I mean, they've built those resumes up. And obviously this season particularly, Jason Myers has 3 more 50-plus yard field goals than any other kicker in Seahawks history. So you got to give the man his kudos. I hope he sticks around for a couple more years, at least for one more solid even year. And then maybe they'll figure out what to do since he is getting up there in age a little bit.
And well, they got to figure out what to do with the odd years because they need him next year. They're going to need that booming leg to be nailing kicks through the uprights. Let's switch gears now. Our final 3 up, 3 down stock watch of the season. Who's hot, who's not. And this is one of those weird games where you won, but there were obviously a lot of players that played well. There were a lot of players that did not play well in this football game and missed opportunities. Let's start with the positives on the offensive side of the football. There are several names that we could throw out here, but I've got to start at the tight end position. A.J. Barner with his 4th touchdown catch this year. I did not have that on my bingo card. And look, I saw some people making some snide comments like, hey, you just thought he was a run-blocking tight end. Look, you watch the tape at Indiana and Michigan, and that's mainly what he was. And there were dropped passes. You did not see a guy that was consistently able to contribute in the passing game. I have been stunned by what he ended up doing, and it feels real because it's been going on all year. We even saw some of it in the preseason. This guy is sneaky athletic at 6'6", 250 pounds. He blocks. He's obviously got good hands. And you know what I love about him the most? We got to see it a few times today. Is when he gets the ball in his hands, like he doesn't want to go out of bounds. This dude is looking to run over you, and he did it a couple times in today's game. Barner, you can make an argument, has been the most consistent rookie for the Seahawks this season. Not Byron Murphy II, not Tyrese Knight. It has been A.J. Barner, and a great way to finish a really good rookie season. I think he is tight end number 1 next year for the Seattle Seahawks.
I think he is too. At this point, I mean, you've got Noah Fant, obviously, who's on a much bigger contract and has much more experience in the NFL, but you said it, Corbin. He is not just a blocking tight end, and I was also going to say he is a sneaky good athlete who does not avoid contact whatsoever. He is always looking to run over whoever's in front of him, and like this guy is a rookie who is making the catches in the back of the end zone that he did a couple weeks ago, where he is just going up, he is high pointing the ball, he's bringing it down, he's a huge target, so he's bigger than most of the defensive backs that are going to be covering him, even the linebackers that are going to be covering him. I think A.J. Barner has a really bright future. I've seen, a couple of the jokes about the fact that obviously he's wearing 88 and you've got, like Jimmy Graham comparisons and things like that happening all the time and so on and so forth. But he does look similar to like a Jimmy Graham type tight end. So who knows what he can do in a couple years or maybe even next year. Also on the up, Corbin, I know you're excited to talk about Kenny McIntosh too, so I won't steal all your airtime. Kenny McIntosh, I think the Seahawks particularly have a very, very difficult decision coming up with the running back room in general. You've seen so much production with Kenny McIntosh and so much upside between him and Zach Charbonnet when they're in, and Ken Walker has obviously not had a great season health-wise and so on and so forth. But this is a loaded running back room, and Kenny McIntosh being the 3rd running back on this team with the spark that he can provide to that run game, just in his ability to stop on a dime, cut a completely different direction, make guys miss. He's got the speed to excel in the NFL at the running back position. Today he had, what did he have? He had 7 carries for 49 yards. Just a really, really good day. And we've seen this over the past couple of weeks now, Corbin, that it's not a one trick or it's not a kind of a one-off thing. Like he is doing it week after week when he does get his opportunities.
Every time that he has gotten an opportunity to carry more than 4 or 5 times this year, there's nothing but good things that are happening. Now, there was a fumble in this game that ended up not counting because there was an offside penalty. His knee might have been down there. We're just going to forget about that because, as you mentioned, 7 yards per carry in this game. He has consistently been getting north of 5.5, 6 yards per carry in these games. And he's bringing an element to this run game that Charbonnet and Walker both do not bring. There is a suddenness to his game that I just love watching. And the other thing is he's a little bit quicker in terms of his lateral mobility than what Zach Charbonnet is. And he's running with the decisiveness that Charbonnet does. Like this dude is hitting the hole hard. And as a running back aficionado, I have been loving, and again, you've been listening to our podcast the last couple of weeks. You know how much I've been raving about this kid. This is the best that I have seen him run today. He is running with power. He's running with quickness. The hands out of the backfield. He can return kickoffs as well. I think that Seattle's going to have some difficult decisions, as you just mentioned, to make, because I don't know how you can't have Kenny McIntosh in the mix next year to get some opportunities with what he has done here over the last month and a half when he's gotten more extended offensive snaps. He has done some good things in pass pro too. That was the biggest concern. He's made improvements there. The last person I want to talk about coming out of this game on the defensive side, you mentioned Ernest Jones earlier, the comments he had post-game in the locker room that he expects there's going to be a deal done with the Seahawks and he's not even going to hit free agency. That would be music to Seahawks fans' ears, especially with the way that you saw him playing today. He had a massive hit on Jimmy Garoppolo on a blitz that led to an incomplete pass. He hit him a second time, finished with nearly double-digit tackles. He was flying all over the field, making plays. He recovered a fumble that many were debating should have been kept a fumble. They overturned it, but he just was all over the field. It was a really good finish to what hopefully will be just the first of many seasons in a Seahawks uniform.
Yeah, I think at this point you've got to keep this linebacker core together, and it's becoming kind of the foundation of the turnaround that we saw from before the bye week to after the bye week. And I know Tyrell Dodson's kind of making some waves over there in Miami. He's got like 3 interceptions now since he showed up and started playing in the Dolphins uniform. But you can't deny the fact that this defense took a huge turn whenever Ernest Jones came in and Tyrese Knight stepped in. You've got to start building up these guys, keeping them together. Ernest Jones just continues to show out. And obviously in a homecoming game, you know he's going to have a little bit of extra fire. Yeah. He even said so after the game. I love it when players before homecoming games downplay the fact that, like, oh, I'm not really thinking about that, which is what Ernest Jones did. And then after the game, he's like, oh, yeah, that was great. I'm so glad I got a win against my former team. That's just one of the funny things about the NFL. But on the downside, Corbin, we've got obviously JSN, who was just so close to catching that record as our first 3 down here. And it was brutal for him. I kind of like the fact that he's sharing this record now with Tyler Lockett. Like, there's kind of some weird sort of symbolism to that like they're supposed to be so close as friends and in the same position group, and now they're sharing this record. But he just wasn't really impactful at all today. He didn't do much. He only had one carry for 4 yards, and then he obviously had the 4 catches for 9 yards, which he was just getting stymied all the time. He wasn't able to pull in that 2-point conversion attempt. A lot of missed opportunities for JSN today, which sucks because he had such a great second season.
Yeah, this one's especially brutal because he tied Tyler Lockett. He got to 100 catches. I mean, still a phenomenal season, but you're just like, you felt like after watching Mike Evans get that 1,000-yard catch at the end, you were kind of hoping that the Seahawks, instead of taking a knee in the last play, let's get it to JSN and get him catch number 101. But it was too risky that deep in your own territory. You don't want to have a pick 6 or something like that. So I get it. Geno Smith wasn't healthy. Just take a knee and get the heck out of there. But it would have been nice to see that. But the drop 2-point conversion, that loomed large at the end of this football game, and they were lucky the Rams did not get in the end zone to end up winning this game because they missed that 2-point conversion that was thrown right into his hands in stride. As far as the next player that I've got on the list here, I don't want to pick on the rookie too much because he got put into a tough spot. But Nehemiah Pritchett, he comes into the game after Reek Woolen and Trey Brown are ruled out with injuries, and there's one play that leads to him being on this list, Connor, and I know where I'm going with this. Jordan Whittington, the rookie receiver for the Rams, pulled a double move, and this is what you call a double move pretzel. He got Nehemiah Pritchett so twisted up that he ended up just tripping over himself and crashed to the turf, and Whittington's wide open. Julian Love, thank goodness, rushed over from a safety spot to get to him after he'd already picked up 50 yards. It could have been a touchdown if Love wouldn't have been quick to react to that. But Pritchett ended up falling face first there. That is not a play that is going to end up on his career highlight reel. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, I think there's been a couple times where he's made some plays where he's shown what his ceiling is this season, Corbin. I mean, he hasn't played that much. He was healthy. He was a healthy scratch the last 2 games, and I was gunning for him to get more playing time in this game because it's like, why wouldn't you see what you have? You already know what you have in Trey Brown. You already know what you have in Artie Burns, both of which are decent cornerbacks who can't stay healthy, is really what their MO has been throughout the past couple seasons. So you got to see what you have in this rookie cornerback. And I just think, unfortunately, he didn't quite step up to the plate. And whenever you get burned that bad, it's not going to look great. But I still don't think he's going to be like, I'm not saying get Nehemiah Pritchett off the team right now. You know, he's a bust, whatever. I mean, you can't really be a bust when you're that late of a draft pick. But wait and see on him. I think he's going to be a roster bubble player going into training camp, and he may or may not be on the team next year. But obviously, he has a full offseason to develop.
And the last but not least here, as far as the 3 down is concerned, I don't want to pick on a player who is potentially going to be on the chopping block. We'll see. Rayshawn Jenkins is a good football player, but coming back from the injury that led him onto injured reserve this year, Kobe Bryant took that job and ran with it. And nothing that Bryant has done the last month and a half has suggested that job is going back to Rayshawn Jenkins. He's got a fairly sizable contract going into the second year, and I don't think there's any guaranteed money on it. Unlike, say, somebody like Geno Smith, who puts all that really good tape in the last game, you saw really poor pursuit angles. You saw some missed tackles in this game, particularly as the Rams were trying to come back and win this one late, where Rayshon Jenkins just did not get the job done. And we just haven't seen the consistency from him as a player that we saw when he was in Jacksonville and with the Chargers. This is a guy that has had some moments this year, but this game, I keep using the word microcosm, but it was a microcosm of his season where you just didn't get the impact plays and there were too many mistakes from a guy that you just don't expect them from. You don't expect to see poor pursuit angles. You don't expect to see a lot of missed tackles, but that was a problem today for number 2. And he also got a face mask penalty that extended a drive that could have been a punt if he wouldn't have reached for the face mask. So it was overall not a good finish to the season for Rayshon Jenkins.
Yeah, I have to go back and look at it to confirm for sure, but I think it was that 4th and 6 on the last Rams drive too, the first 4th down conversion that they made that it may have just been an assignment mix-up or just literally where he was supposed to be in his zone, but it just looked like there was a play that could have been made that he did not make. And you already kind of stated it, Corbin, but I just think the main reason he's here at the end of the season is that you brought him in to remake the safety room. He begins the season as a starter, and then now it just seems like his snaps week after week are just kind of going down to where he's really very much a rotational safety. I mean, he was a rotational safety when he came back from injury, but less so than he was. And I just think that's disappointing when you have a guy who began the season, I thought, playing pretty darn well, all things considered. He obviously had the fumble return for a touchdown against the Giants. I mean, there was highlight plays that he was making before he landed on IR, and he just hasn't really been – I don't think he's had the same opportunities he's had since then, and that's mostly probably because of Kobe Bryant stepping into his role and overall just playing better.
As always, you can follow me on X and Blue Sky at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Connor at C. John Benintendi. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcasts to make sure you don't miss a single episode. There is no offseason on Locked On Seahawks. We are going to be having our final Monday musings coming up on tomorrow's show, and then we'll be starting to transition into offseason mode. As always, we greatly appreciate each and every one of you for tuning in and making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. And let's keep it rolling into 2025's offseason and eventually when we get back to playing football and training camp next July. Thanks for listening in. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Go Hawks.